phenomenal for an action RPG.
Oh, that looks so cool. Look at that armor set. That looks amazing. Oh my god, that looks like some of the armor sets you could get in Elden Ring. I know it's supposed to be based off of some anime. I can't remember the name of it, but oh man, that looks so good. That looks so good, guys. Guys, I've been super excited for Final Fantasy 16. IGN just released a review, and I've been holding off on watching it just so that we could do it together. Hopefully this game is as good as the hype has made it seem it's going to be. I mean, graphically it looks stunning. The only bad part is I can't kind of push the game with my PC. It's going to be only on PS5, I'm pretty sure, for like the first year or so. But the review just released. IGN doesn't necessarily have a good track record of good reviews for games that really deserve it. So hopefully they did this one justice. Let's see how it is.
Before we begin, a quick note about spoilers. I'm going to do my best to keep this review spoiler-free by mostly showing gameplay from the first third or so of the campaign. But
the first third of the campaign, that's a pretty significant portion of the game. I would honestly like to see less than the first quarter of the game, but hopefully they don't spoil any of the big reveals in the first third of the game.
Some mechanics and talking points I will be going over don't appear till much later. It's all stuff that will be familiar to you if you've watched the Final Fantasy 16 focused state of play, but if you'd like to go in entirely fresh, you can leave knowing that Final Fantasy 16 is one of my favorites in the series to date.
Alright, okay, that's already good news. One of his favorites to date. That's awesome.
Now, on with the review. Even with 16 mainline entries, 20 if you include X2, 13-2, Lightning Returns, and Final Fantasy VII Remake, and a slew
that's a lot of
games. There's no Final Fantasy game quite like Final Fantasy 16. The latest in this legendary series is more an evolution of the character action genre than the RPG foundation that the franchise was built on.
I think these are the best particle effects I've ever seen in any game ever. Maybe Returnal had slightly better particle effects, but the way, I don't know if it's magic or if it's like another part of his combat gear, but the way the particles kind of brush off every time you hit a character, it looks amazing.
It merges quick twitch reflexes with character building RPG mechanics, but focuses far more on the former than ever before. And look, it's not a perfect mixture. While the combat is phenomenal for an action RPG,
oh, that looks so cool. Look at that armor set. That looks amazing. Oh my god, that looks like some of the armor sets you could get in Elden Ring. I know it's supposed to be based off of some anime. I can't remember the name of it, but oh man, that looks so good. That looks so good, guys.
Rates of the character action genre, but even an imperfect mix is potent enough. When paired with
See, I'm not super sure about the QuickTime events. I would rather just have like a smooth flowing combat. They might do it right. They might do QuickTime events better than any game has done before, but I'm not 100% sold on them yet.
FF16's epic 50-plus hour story. It's packed with
50-plus hours just for the story? That might be a bit too long. I shouldn't complain. Well, I might end up loving it like Elden Ring, and no amount of game time is enough, but 50 hours seems like a little long.
Unforgettable characters, outstanding world building, an incredible soundtrack, and knock your socks off moments of sheer spectacle, the likes of which are rarely seen in any game.
The soundtrack does seem amazing. It seems very epic, and like it really gets you excited. I like the soundtrack.
Final Fantasy 16 picks up the ball that FF14 got rolling and continues to move the series back down the path of high fantasy, taking more than a little inspiration from Game of Thrones along the way. Its story spans decades.
As long as they don't copy the last season of Game of Thrones, I'm okay with that.
Decades worth of history in the realm of Valistia, a land brimming with both beauty and death as an encroaching blight forces neighboring kingdoms to fight over untainted resources.
I love this like high fantasy art style. I keep referring to Elden Ring, but Elden Ring did it really well with their map and how you could kind of pin stuff on the map yourself and make the map your own. I love this like high fantasy art style. It looks phenomenal. Like it's almost like burnt paper kind of, or like a kind of parchment instead of like the normal copy paper we have now. I love like that like worn down art style. It looks amazing. Really helps you kind of be in the world you're playing. I love it.
Including 5 enormous mother crystals.
Oh, look at that architecture. That looks stunning. Absolutely amazing. Lots of detail in it too. That looks like some of those impossible kind of architectures from like Castlevania. If you guys ever saw like the Netflix show, very good show, by the way, definitely worth the watch. If you see like the architecture in that show, that's what this reminds me of, kind of like the impossible freestanding kind of structures. It looks great.
That are the primary source of the realm's magic. At the heart of this tale is your character, Clive Rossfield, the eldest prince of the kingdom of Rosaria and protector of his brother Joshua, the dominant of Phoenix. And if you don't know what that is, don't worry, we'll get to it later, but let's not get bogged down in jargon for now. Clive is a fantastic, well-rounded protagonist, brilliantly brought to life by actor Ben Starr. He undergoes a lot of change and development over the course of the decades-long story, but always remains supremely likable, relatable, and an absolute badass when the need arises.
It shouldn't be understated how important it is to like the protagonist you're playing as. If you don't like who you're playing as, there's no point in playing the game. It can completely drive you off from the game, right? I recently played a game called Atomic Heart, more of an indie title, I guess you could call it that. It just didn't have AAA budgets, but it had like the cringiest, worst dialogue a protagonist could ever have. If you guys have ever played it, you know what I'm talking about. This protagonist alone, the gameplay was fine, the art style was fine, the graphics were great. Everything about the game was great except for this protagonist. And his super crappy dialogue made me not want to play the game. I played maybe like 4 or 5 hours of it and then just stopped. Just because the dialogue was so bad. He kept saying something like, crispy critters. And it was so cringy. Every time like a super serious, depressing moment occurred or something, he would say, crispy critters. And it wasn't like this game didn't have like cursing in it and stuff. The game was rated M for mature. It had a lot of language, super bloody. And then he'd say weird stuff like that. That might be because of mistranslation, because I think the game's originally Russian. But regardless of the mistranslation, like it made me not want to play the game because I'm playing the game in English, right? And a crappy dialogue from the protagonist will just drive you away from the game, even if everything else is great. So this is really good to hear that this character that we will be playing as in Final Fantasy 16 is well-rounded. I want to be able to like him. I want to feel for him. I want to be able to put myself in his shoes because we're playing as him, right? So knowing the fact that he's going to be a well-rounded character gives me some comfort. I like that.
As it very often does.
We've played your games. Now tell me where he is.
The rest of the cast is fantastic as well. Jill, played by the excellent Susanna Fielding, is Clive's childhood friend and acts as a wonderful companion that understands and empathizes with Clive on a deep and emotional level.
Potential love interest
between them are always a highlight as their relationship grows. Sid is probably my new all-time favorite Final Fantasy character.
Oh, he's got a dog. He's my favorite too.
Yourself into now. The best kind.
He's got an almost
that might be a wolf. I'm not sure.
Liam Neeson vibe going on, despite being voiced impeccably by Ralph Ineson, who's having quite a 2023 in the world of video games.
He kind of does look like a young Liam Neeson.
At least have the decency to join me for supper.
Sid is a natural leader, full of charisma and charm, and without going into detail, his cause is one that's very easy to rally behind and made me excited to follow him and his band of outlaws.
Awesome.
The greatest achievement of Final Fantasy XVI's story, though, is how it never leaves you to drown in its lore. This is a massive world complete with 5 kingdoms, each with their own forms of government, rulers, religions, and ideals. A whole encyclopedia's worth of realm-specific terms like bearers, icons, and dominants, and a grand history of the world that you're expected to keep up with if you want to get the most out of the big story beats. It would all be a little overwhelming if not for an ingenious quality of life feature that I truly hope becomes standard throughout all story-heavy video games.
What is it?
Active time lore. At any point during any main story cutscene or conversation,
cool.
you can hold down the DualSense touchpad to bring up a series of contextual compendium entries that are relevant to what's going on in that
That's
scene.
awesome.
So, anytime...
Okay, so I'm somebody who likes to read every single item description, every single note that you find. If I'm really into the game, mind you. If I hate the game, I won't do it. But like, for example, in The Witcher 3, I feel like I was one of the few people who read every single book that I came across. Now, I know that is not how most general people play it. Like, the average gamer isn't going to read every single book they pick up. For people like that, this kind of lore, world building is sufficient, right? If you can stop the game at any point and kind of read a little description of what's going on around you at that moment, that is very convenient for most players. I think I will still, if it gives you the option, of course, I will still read every single thing that I come across, just because that's how I like to play games that I'm super interested in. But I feel like this is a really good move for them to kind of bring in players who don't stop at every single corner of the map just to read every single little note and diary entry or whatever. So this is a great idea. This is a good way to bring in all gamers.
A character mentioned a term, character, or location that I either didn't know about or needed a reminder about.
They're freed Imperial bearers.
I could bring up the active time lore, and a succinct entry would be right there to get me up to speed. These entries change with the events of the story too, updating with new information about the state of the world and Clive's knowledge about it as it happens.
That's great.
Having this kind of feature was a godsend. Later on, big missions are also preceded with stylish history lessons by your crew's scholar that fill you in on what you need to know about the region you're about to visit.
I know it's a small detail, but I like these little animations instead of just like putting text on the screen. Kind of brings in the player. I like that little attention to detail.
Rulers are, their ambitions, their allies, their enemies, and so on. I know that might sound like school, but it actually did a really effective job of bringing me into and keeping me invested in the realm of Valistia.
That's great. Especially if the game is going to be nearly as complicated as something like Game of Thrones, I feel like it's important to break down every little thing. You want to kind of understand what's going on with all the factions. I don't know if they're called factions, but all the factions and all the characters and all the locations. So it's good to keep track of it in some manner, right?
One of the most interesting elements of the story, and one that also ends up being an awesome addition to the already excellent combat, is the existence of icons and dominance. Icons are supremely powerful beings that Final Fantasy fans will recognize as the usual summons from previous games.
I've heard a lot about this.
Are the special humans who are able to tap into their power, even to the point of fully transforming into them.
That looks really cool.
So powerful that they're almost used like nuclear deterrent.
Oh my god, that looks awesome. Like the electricity kind of surging through. I think that's like, that might be water. I don't know yet, but that looks so cool. The art style is awesome. Man, this really gets me like super hyped up for like this high fantasy kind of world. I love it. I'm not even someone who played like all the Final Fantasy games, right? I touched on them here and there, but as someone who's kind of a newbie and doesn't know too much about the Final Fantasy lore, this is what gets me interested. This kind of art style, that's what brings me in. This looks amazing.
Saved as a last resort due to the potential mutually assured destruction that would be caused by their fights. But fight they will, and every time they do, it's an unforgettable scrap of gargantuan proportion. I'd be remiss to spoil these encounters by talking too much about them, but I will say they're absolute spectacles. Some are like giant kaiju fights mixed in with Dragon Ball Z. Others take the gameplay in a completely different direction and play out like a Panzer Dragoon level.
Oh, that looks so cool. That looks so cool. I wonder how much control you have over like the actual flight. Like, are you controlling where you're flying, or are you just controlling where you're aiming?
Nearly all of them brought back memories of playing Asura's Wrath,
probably just where you're aiming,
3, and that feeling of just being absolutely floored by the breathtaking sense of scale and overwhelming power.
Yeah, that looks cool, man.
Final Fantasy has been shifting further and further away from its turn-based RPG roots for a long time now, and with Final Fantasy XVI, it feels like a metamorphosis that has been in the works for years is finally complete. Final Fantasy XVI's combat is a straight-up action game, Full stop. It's fast, flexible, extremely reflex-driven, and is full of opportunities to absolutely style on your enemies with air combos, jump cancels, and a huge arsenal of extremely powerful spells and abilities.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. I know a lot of people, this is a dividing opinion, right? Some people are going to love getting away from the turn-based kind of combat, and some people are going to hate it, right? So if you are somebody that hates turn-based combat and you want to go more towards like this action-oriented style, which I think is the majority of players, mind you, I think especially like younger gamers who didn't grow up playing too many turn-based games, they're going to love this. They're going to love the action-oriented DMC5 kind of combat. For the players who love turn-based combat, I'm one of the players who actually kind of likes turn-based combat depending on the game. I feel like you should still give this a shot just because it might win you over. It might be the first like super action-oriented game that you actually grow to like. I feel like there still is a lot of strategy in action-oriented games. Like DMC5, if you play through it on, I think, one of the harder difficulties, it can be pretty difficult and your combos matter and it's not all about your reaction and twitchiness. It's also a little bit about what you actually do with the character, right? And I feel like action-oriented games can do this well. And not everything's going to be like Call of Duty where you have to just kind of walk around a corner and have like amazing reflexes. Some games, it really matters what you do and what action you take with your player. Like the Souls games, it's not necessarily about how twitchy you are. I mean, some bosses it matters, but it's more about like not necessarily twitching or reacting, but timing things before you really have to react. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but when I first started playing Bloodborne, that was my first experience in the Soulsborne genre. When I first started playing Bloodborne, I didn't realize you have to dodge into the enemy. That was like a learning curve for me. It wasn't necessarily about how twitchy I was or how good my reflexes were. It was more about just understanding how to play. It was a different kind of strategy. So if you're somebody who is obsessed with turn-based games and wants to kind of go into action-oriented games, this could be a good one, right? It might just change your playstyle a little bit, but it might be more strategic than you originally thought. Based on what I'm seeing of the gameplay, this reminds me a lot of Devil May Cry 5, if you guys have played that game. I wasn't like the biggest fan of the lore or anything in that game, but the combat was sufficient. Like it did the job. This hopefully is better than DMC5's combat. It seems to be very hack and slash, but I don't want it to kind of delve into like button mashy kind of combat. That's not something I'm a fan of. So hopefully they find a good balance between having some strategy in it and also being able to help the player kind of enjoy like the hack and slash kind of combat mechanics. But we'll see.
Some sacrifices are made to facilitate this transformation. You only ever control one character. Levels are far more linear than they've been in the past, and many of the actual RPG elements have been made to play second fiddle in ways I'll discuss shortly. Purists might not be a fan of these drastic changes, but I found this approach far more preferable to FF15's more hybrid take on combat, and equally enjoyable to FF7 Remake's unique take.
I 100% agree with that. I would rather them go completely one way or the other and not go like the hybrid route. I know that's not like a super popular opinion. Some people love the combat mechanics in Final Fantasy 15. Some people think Final Fantasy 7 Remake's combat is the best combat to ever exist. So I know it's not a popular opinion, but I would rather it just be completely action-oriented, like real-time combat, or just completely turn-based. I don't like the middle grounds that some games try and do.
Despite how chaotic the action may look, it's actually elegantly simple.
I love these particle effects. Looks great.
Clive can execute a 4-hit melee combo.
That looks like a Souls
square.
boss.
He can shoot magic with triangle to hit enemies at a distance. He can use an ability unique to whatever icon power he currently has equipped.
I was wondering why the character, the enemy wasn't
And
attacking,
he
but I
also
guess
has
this is like a
access to
training
up to 2
ground.
abilities from that icon as well. In familiar Final Fantasy fashion, for bigger enemies and bosses, there's a stagger meter that you can fill by landing attacks. And once it's full, they
I
can be
love
put
these
into a
particle
staggered state,
effects.
giving you an opportunity to build up a multiplier and lay down huge amounts of damage for a limited amount of time. Much of the skill involved with combat comes from your ability to quickly stagger enemies and then maximize the amount of damage you're able to do while they're staggered by optimally using your skills and switching between your icons. To
Okay.
that end, there's a lot of smart mechanics in place that reward skillful play. If you just mash the attack button, you won't build up staggered very quickly. But if you use carefully timed magic attacks in between
That's
your melee
great.
attacks, you'll execute magic bursts. Which
That's
do more
awesome. That's what I was worried about. I don't want it to be super button mashy. I want there to be some thought in there in the gameplay.
damage and build more stagger. On top of that, perfectly timed evasions give opportunity for counterattacks that deal
great.
big stagger damage. Or if you're feeling extra fancy, you could try to time an attack to clash with theirs to trigger a parry, which slows down time and allows for even more punishment. It's a great combat system that kept my brain firing at a rapid pace as I balanced timing my magic bursts with managing my skill cooldowns and keeping an eye out for enemy tells to be ready to dodge, on top of just trying to look cool for the sake of looking cool, which is always an important element of any action
Of
game in
course.
my book.
Yeah. You have to look cool while you're doing it. That's what she said.
One of my favorite touches is that you can issue commands to your Hound Torgal, one of which will launch weaker enemies, allowing me to zip right to them in the air, juggle them with some quick aerial hits, and then send them crashing back down with an explosive Helm Splitter style attack. All that said, this is a long game, and while you do pretty regularly get new icons and abilities, they don't change up combat in ways that make the basic fights substantially different or more engaging.
No.
Which means they do eventually lose some of their luster.
that's not
That
good.
isn't helped by lots of recycled enemy types in the open fields and linear dungeons that you explore either. At least the bosses were always fresh and
Oh my
exciting.
god, that looks so cool. Whatever enemy that is, that enemy design's
Many playing
awesome.
with some fun Final Fantasy tropes, like having the names of big attacks show up on screen, and some exceptionally dangerous techniques, even having a countdown that ends with an extremely powerful blow if you're unable to do enough damage to stop them from getting it off.
That's
Many
cool.
of the bigger boss battles also have QTEs that do a wonderful job of adding extra cinematic flair and punctuate the different phases of a fight with some truly awesome moments.
Take a beating.
The hair physics look amazing too on the enemies.
As touched upon earlier, the weird twist of Final Fantasy XVI is that while the action elements are all top-notch, the RPG elements are a little underdeveloped.
Sure.
Loot seems like an afterthought. I never once felt incentivized to explore either the corners of the linear main levels or the open fields of the interconnected overworlds.
No!
And in general, there just aren't a ton of character building choices that you can make to customize Clive in any sort of unique way.
There's absolutely no point in creating a large, expansive world that is explorable if there's no reason to explore it. So that really worries me. Not now. This guy's opinions might not necessarily be super accurate. I'll have to see for myself, but I really hope they reward exploration more than he's saying they do.
The deepest it gets is that you can equip Clive with up to 3 accessories that can have a variety of useful effects, usually powering up specific special abilities, increasing your combo damage, or increasing healing potency. You also
Okay.
begin with a total of 5 special rings that are designed to take some of the edge off of combat in lieu of lower difficulty modes. One essentially lets you mash square and let the AI take the wheel as it automatically casts spells, switches icons, and uses basic attacks, while another will automatically dodge as long as an attack is capable of being avoided.
Okay, so it seems like I'm not going to ever use any of these 3 items or whatever they are, because it's just difficulty oriented. It's just kind of assists. Interesting way to do it. Instead of doing it through the menus, you can kind of equip your character at something. That's an interesting way to do it. That's like kind of like the way Elden Ring did it. You can't choose a difficulty per se, but you could always use spirit summons. That is their way of kind of choosing the difficulty, right? Although in Elden Ring, I would say it's more important than just not playing with spirit summons. They're kind of important, especially later game. It becomes really difficult. But in this game, I think they're doing it in a really unique way, which is good.
While I personally didn't feel the need to use these rings, I do appreciate their
Rings,
inclusion
that's what
as
they
a
are.
completely optional way to adjust the difficulty in very specific ways. Of course, the downside is that if you do equip them, you won't have the space for other stat-altering accessories, thus removing the one element of RPG-like customization altogether.
I don't like that. So if someone just wants to have an easier time with the game, they can't really experiment with the RPG style mechanics. That's not good. It shouldn't take up I wish they were completely different slots and it wasn't the same slots that were used for these difficulty modifiers as well as other items.
Final Fantasy XVI really impressed me was in the quality of its side quests. Well, eventually,
good.
They actually start out pretty generic and menial, with objectives like finding X number of Y items out in the field or delivering 3 hot bowls of soup to people in the hideout.
Food looks good.
However, in the back half of the story, these side quests act as smart ways to button up all the loose threads outside of the main campaign. Side characters are given proper send-offs, pieces that were toppled over in the central story are satisfyingly built back up, and characters that you wouldn't really expect to have very deep backstories open up to you in often very moving ways. It's exactly the kind of side content that I want in a big RPG, even though it takes a little while to get there. In addition to side quests, there's also a bounty board
that looks so cool. That character design looks really cool. I love the art style in this game. It's very high fantasy. I like that they're not kind of holding back and trying to make it a little realistic or anything like that. This looks great.
Used to locate exceptionally challenging monsters for some greater rewards. Many of them are just stronger versions of enemies that you've already fought, but others are boss encounters unto themselves and make up some of the hardest fights available.
This is kind of like the elephants from Assassin's Creed Origins or the from God of War. They had those Valkyries. So I'm assuming this is something like that, just like some extra challenge for people who are looking for it. That's great. I always, for games that I love a lot, I'll do 100%. I'll do everything in it. So it's good to know that there's some optional stuff that's going to be extra difficult that I'll get to kind of tackle.
Things considered, there's a fair amount of extra content here to keep you busy.
And
you'll want to do as much of it as you can to be ready for New Game Plus, which significantly ups both the challenge and the level cap, and introduces...
These are some of the best fire effects I think I've ever seen in a game, aside from maybe like Grand Theft Auto or GTA 5. These fire effects look amazing. Like after he attacks them, the way the character or the enemies catch on fire and the fire kind of lingers on them for a bit, it looks amazing. Let me back up just a minute here.
Some greater rewards. Many of them are just stronger versions of enemies that you've already fought, but others are boss encounters unto themselves and make up some of the hardest fights available.
Look at those fire effects. Yeah, like the way...
content here
trying to... it's hard to find a good frame here, but the way the enemy caught on fire there, yeah, that looks so good. That looks like real fire to me. I know this is a 1080p video and it's not probably going to show a lot of detail, but that looks really good to me.
Do as much of it as you can to be ready for New Game Plus, which significantly ups both the challenge
foliage looks good.
And
not Starfield levels of good, but this looks really good.
That, there's also an arcade mode that you can use to go through previous levels and try to set high scores to upload to an online leaderboard.
Oh, cool. Okay.
There's a lot to do,
little bit of
once the credits finish
competitive
rolling.
Mechanics.
And oh my god, the soundtrack by Bahamut's Grace, the soundtrack.
The prince is with us.
I'm getting chills, guys. A soundtrack makes or breaks a game, and that seems like it's going to be making the game. That sounds really good. I've barely heard any of it, and I'm getting excited probably for no reason, but him saying it's good and me listening to the little snippet he just showed us, it sounds good.
To perfectly accompany every big scene, whether it's the tender moments between Clive and Jill, the quiet moments of respite inside the hideaway, or the absolutely epic battles between icons.
Ooh, that sounds good.
I don't know if I'm ready to claim it in the top Final Fantasy soundtracks of all time just yet, but it's certainly one of the best soundtracks of 2023 so far. Final Fantasy XVI looks stunning too. The performance may not hold onto a consistent 60 FPS all the time, even on the prioritized frame rate graphical setting, but those minor hiccups don't stop.
Yeah, if you guys are worried about bugs, just play the game 6 months later. That's what I would probably recommend for every new game that releases. If you're worried about bugs or frame rate issues, it's probably going to be fixed in like the next 6 months.
From still being one of the most gorgeous games I've ever played.
Oh, love it. Better be a 10 out of 10, sir. Probably is going to be a 10 out of 10.
Final Fantasy XVI will likely be looked back upon as a turning point for the mainline Final Fantasy games, taking its combat fully in the direction of an action game. But I hope that conversation doesn't overshadow its dark and captivating tale, its memorable characters, and the innovative way.
You know, these, what are they called? QuickTime events are actually growing on me.
Final Fantasy XVI will likely be looked back upon as a turning point for the mainline Final Fantasy games, taking its combat fully in the direction of an action game. But I hope that conversation...
Because if you, because I was just thinking about this, if they completely removed like every single QuickTime event that the game had and kept it all, you know, in live action kind of, you would lose all of these super cool cutscenes, and you wouldn't get to... Well, I guess they could keep the cutscenes and just get rid of the QuickTime events, and the game just kind of finishes the cutscene. I don't know. I'm going back and forth on this. This is something I'm going to have to just play to kind of know if I like it or not. Usually, I'm not a fan of QuickTime events. This looks really cool the way it's done, just because they're like supposed to be these gargantuan entities, right? And you're fighting, and the environment around you is being destroyed. It would be okay to me, in my opinion, if the haptic feedback in the controllers and everything's done well, the surround sound's done well in the headset. These QuickTime events might actually be pretty good. Now we'll have to see, but this is definitely growing on me, and it has grown on me throughout the video. So hopefully it's as good as it looks now.
Doesn't overshadow its dark and captivating tale, its memorable characters, and the innovative ways in which it helps you keep track of it all. The active time lore feature is incredible and should be standard for all story-driven games going forward.
Yeah, I really like the way they're putting forth the lore through those active time war mechanics. Better than having to read every single thing for people who aren't interested in reading every single thing.
The combat may not live up to the sky-high standards as some of the best games in the character action genre. Among other action RPGs, it's near the top of the heap.
I will say, best particle effects probably out of any game that is released so far. These particle effects look amazing. I'll have to watch Digital Foundry's review on it, but man, those particle effects look good.
All of that with one of the best soundtracks,
especially
the
fire.
Incredible performances from top to bottom, and drop-dead gorgeous visuals, and you've got a game worthy of an orchestral Final Fantasy victory fanfare.
Orchestral is a good way to describe it. A 9. I guess the lack of importance given to exploration probably took it down a point.
For more Final Fantasy 16,
which makes sense, right?
The first minutes of the game, and for everything else, keep it here on IGN.
So, I mean, like I said, I have one concern with this game, and that one concern is exploration. If this game is good in every other way and the exploration absolutely sucks, I will still play it. I will still love it. But that being said, exploration is important to me, especially for games that claim to have a bit of an open world or claim to have really expansive environments. I think they should have put more effort into exploration. I don't know yet because I haven't played the game. I'm going to play the game when the rest of you guys play the game, right? That's my only worry. I think they did the lore really well based on what he said. They have added in a way to kind of take in all the intricate and complicated politics going on in the world by having that like live lore mechanic, that whatever they call it, I don't remember what they call it, but the lore seems to be done really well, and how it's how the information is put forth for the player, it seems to be done really well. The really big monster battles that they have, I forget what they're called, but when you're like a phoenix or whatever, when you're flying through these cliff sides trying to attack other entities, that looks amazing. Hopefully the QuickTime events are done well, but I'm going to just hold off on giving too many opinions about that until I actually play the game. Because like you can't really show off feel until you play it yourself, especially with the technology and the PS5 controllers. You won't really know what it feels like until you play it, right? So I'm going to hold off on my opinions on QuickTime events. Hopefully they're good, but we'll see. The lack of importance given to things like food, like in other RPG mechanics, is kind of disappointing, especially if you want to be somebody who plays on a lower difficulty and kind of use those difficulty modifiers. It's a two-sided, what's the phrase? It's like a two-sided coin, right? Like on one hand, you could argue that if you want to play with RPG mechanics, just get good. On the other hand, I'm thinking, well, they do have difficulty scales in a way, except they're given through rings. If you were going to include difficulty options anyway, maybe do it in a way where the people playing on lower difficulties still get to experience these RPG mechanics. Having those rings take up slots that would otherwise be utilized for RPG mechanics doesn't seem like the best idea to me. If you're going to have difficulty options, have them, but then give everyone the option to play with the RPG mechanics that you've implemented in the game. I wish food was a little bit more important. It sounds like, based on what the guy said, exploration doesn't really have too big an impact on things like meals. So hopefully these worries are kind of washed away as soon as I start playing the game. My last concern, and this is not going to be necessarily a concern for everybody, but my last concern is the fact that it's 50 hours long. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I hope it's not dragged out. If the combat starts to feel repetitive, if there's not good pacing, there's a lot of things that could go wrong with a game that's that long, right? The reason Elden Ring, I have 132 hours on one playthrough for Elden Ring, and then a little bit more for other playthroughs. The reason that was okay was because you're constantly feeling like there's a sense of progression for the character, whether that be in leveling, whether that be in the weapons you're utilizing and kind of trying to try out different play styles, whether that be through exploration. That is super rewarding. Going off the main path can really give you a lot of stuff that can help out. So Elden Ring was able to keep the player invested for over 100 hours without any kind of slow points. This game's going to be 50 hours long, so it's going to be maybe half the length of Elden Ring, but the combat doesn't seem to be changing much. You might not be able to get as many ways to experiment with what you kind of have. That's my main concern. It's not necessarily that the game is 50 hours long. The concern is it's 50 hours long with maybe not as much depth as a game like Elden Ring. Again, all of these things I'm saying as like a concern, not necessarily like set in stone kind of opinion. All of these opinions might kind of be changed depending on how good the game is and how much I like it and how good the combat is, and am I okay with a similar combat style for 50 hours. But we'll see. After I play the game, I'll give some thoughts on it, and I'll let you guys know what I think. But so far, so good. 9 out of 10 isn't a bad score. The few factors that are kind of hurting the game could be detrimental depending on who's playing the game. If you're someone who just loves exploration, if you're coming from something like Breath of the Wild and exploration is like your number one concern, this might not be for you. It just depends on what kind of player you are, I guess. And obviously, opinions on games like this are always going to be subjective, but I just hope 50 hours isn't too long for a game like this. I hope most people are able to finish it without being bored or feeling like they're kind of dragged through the story. So, yeah, we'll see. I think graphics look good. Gameplay looks good. Particle effects look great. Lore looks good. We'll see. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. If you liked the video, maybe give it a like, maybe subscribe. I'll be doing more reaction videos, maybe doing some more reviews in the upcoming future. Yeah, so if you like the content, maybe like and subscribe. All right, take care, guys. Bye.